She had been saying yes to George for 4 months and had not said it wrong once. She said yes to the dinner invitation, and yes to the formal call, and yes to the proposal in the parlor of her boarding house on a Sunday afternoon in March while the landlady was conveniently in the kitchen. She had said yes sincerely and without reservation, and had been in the 4 months since consistently sincere about it. George was a good man. She knew this with the confidence of long observation. She had been watching him be good for 2 years, since before James left, since after James left, through the whole of the period during which she had been organizing herself around the fact of James being gone, and George had been present and steady and kind through all of it without making anything of it. He was the kind of man who made things better by being there and did not need to be thanked for it. She had said yes to him and meant it and intended to keep meaning it. James Aldridge had left Harmon Creek in the spring of 1882 with a cattle drive for Kansas. He had said he would be back in 6 weeks. He had said it matter-of-factly, the way he said most things. And she had said she would see him when he returned, and neither of them had said anything about what that meant beyond the literal meaning, because they had been careful with each other in the way of two people who feel something real and have not yet said it directly and are each waiting for the other to say it first, which was a way of being careful that she had been aware of and had not known how to stop. She had intended to be less careful when he came back. He had not come back when he said he would. He had not come back at all. And she had been careful for 2 years about that instead. She was planning her school lessons at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in October when the knock came. She went to the door in her home dress with her hair not yet properly pinned and opened it, and it was James. She looked at him for a moment. He was holding his hat in both hands, which she noticed before anything else, and he was dusty from the road, and he had dark stubble and gray eyes that had been dark gray when she knew him, and were darker gray now, and he was exactly as she had spent 2 years making herself stop expecting him to look. She said, "James." He said, "Clara." She said, "It's 6 in the morning." He said, "I know. I'm sorry. I rode through the night." She said, "Why?" He said, "I heard you're getting married." She said, "I am." She said, "You should have come back 2 years ago." He said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry." She said, "You said that." He said, "It's true both times." She said, "Come in, you're letting the cold in." Clara Voss had come to the Colorado Territory in 1879 with her parents, her father who had wanted land, and her mother who had wanted her father, and they had filed a homestead claim on the North Road outside Harmon Creek and had spent the first summer building something out of it. Her father had died the following winter from a heart that had been unreliable since the war and had finally become reliable about failing. Her mother had lasted 2 more years on the frontier before concluding, with the specific clarity of a woman who has tried something and found it is not where she intends to end her life, that Ohio was where she was going back to. She had asked Clara to come. Clara had said no, which had surprised her mother and had not surprised Clara, who had understood that saying yes would require becoming again the person she had been in Ohio, and that person was 23 years old and had spent her whole life waiting for something to begin. The frontier, for all its difficulty, had the specific quality of being something that was already happening, and she intended to stay in it. She had been teaching at the Harmon Creek School for 3 years by the fall of 1880, which was when she met James Aldridge at the Harvest Social, and for 2 years after that, which was when he left, and for the year after that, which was when she had been deciding every day to stop expecting him to come back, and for the 6 months after that, which was when she had begun accepting George Harmon's invitations, and for the 4 months after that, which was when she had said yes in the parlor on a Sunday afternoon. George had been kind about the whole of it, not in the careful, kind way of a man who wants something and is being strategic about getting it, but in the straightforward, kind way of a man who liked her and was being himself. He had not pressed. He had not asked about James. He had been present and reliable and had made her laugh on 3 separate occasions with the specific dry humor of a man who has been watching the same small town do its business for years and has opinions about it. She had said yes to him honestly. She had meant it. She had been, in the 4 months since, consistently glad that she had meant it, except for the particular hours between midnight and 4 in the morning on the nights when she lay awake and thought about nothing in particular, which was how she had been not thinking about James Aldridge for 2 years. She had met James Aldridge at a harvest social in the fall of 1880, a cattle drover who worked the route between Colorado and Kansas, 32 years old, quiet in the specific way of people who observe everything and are careful about what they say because they mean what they say. He had asked her to dance once and then twice and had come to call the following week and the week after that, and by the winter of 1881 she had understood that the thing she felt about James Aldridge was the kind of thing that reorganizes how you move through a room. She had not said this to anyone. She had been practical about it, had continued teaching, had continued being adequate to the adequacy of her life. But James had been there every Tuesday evening, regular as the week itself, and she had arranged her Tuesdays around him without quite naming what she was doing. In the spring of 1882, James had told her he was driving cattle to Kansas. He expected to be back in 6 weeks. He had said this in the Tuesday evening way, matter of fact, and she had said she would see him when he returned, and she had made no statement about what she expected or what she felt, because she had been careful about those things for reasons she had understood and reasons she had not. And the 6 weeks had passed, and then 12 weeks, and then the summer had become the fall, and the fall had become the winter, and she had not heard from him, not one letter, not one word through any channel she had access to. She had spent the winter of 1882 in the very specific work of deciding that she was not going to be a woman who waited indefinitely for a man who had not asked her to wait, and by the spring of 1883 she had mostly succeeded at this and had accepted when George Harmon asked her to a concert, which was a harmless thing, and then to dinner, which was slightly less harmless, and then to the parlor, which was the thing she had said yes to in March. James stood at her kitchen table and said, "I need to tell you what happened." She said, "You don't." He said, "I do." She said, "James." He said, "Please." She sat down. He sat across from her. He said, "My father was dying. I got the telegram at the first stop in Kansas. I left the drive and rode to Missouri, and I was there for 4 months while he died, and then another month settling the estate. And by the time I came back to Colorado, I had been gone 8 months, and I had written you twice and gotten no letters back, and I thought." He stopped. He said, "I thought the no letters meant something." She said, "I never received any letters." He said, "I know that now." A pause. He said, "I sent them to the wrong boarding house. I remembered the street wrong." She looked at him across the table. "When I got back to Colorado," he said, "I heard you were—" He stopped again. He said, "I heard you were seeing someone. Harmon, at the store." She said, "Yes." He said, "And I told myself it was too late. And I kept telling myself that." He said, "And then I heard you were getting married in 3 weeks." He said, "I couldn't." He said, "I needed you to know it wasn't because I stopped. I need you to know that." She sat with this for a long time. The lamp was still lit between them because it was still early enough to need the lamp. Outside, the Harmon Creek morning was beginning. She could hear the town waking up in the particular way of small frontier towns, gradually and without announcement. She said, "Why didn't you come back when you got the estate settled?" He said, "I did. I came back in the fall of 1882. She said, He said, "And I saw you at the social with Harmon. You were laughing at something he said." A pause. "You were wearing your blue dress." She said nothing. He said, "You looked like someone who had moved on. And I thought taking that from you would be wrong." She said, "It wasn't yours to take." He said, "I know that now too." She said, "James." He said, "Yes." She said, "I need you to leave." He said, "All right." He stood. He picked up his hat. He said, "I know I'm too late. I just needed you to know that it wasn't because I stopped." She said, "I know." He said, "Do you?" She looked at him with the green eyes that had spent 2 years not looking at what they were looking at. She said, "Yes." He nodded. He put his hat on. He walked to the door. He turned once at the door, and she was still at the table, and she was not going to call him back, and he was not going to ask her to, and they both held this understanding for a moment, which was its own kind of conversation. He went out. She heard his horse on the road going west. She sat at the kitchen table until the lamp was unnecessary, and then she put it out and sat in the morning light that was coming through the east window now, which was the light she sat in every morning to plan her lessons. She thought about George. She thought about the social in the fall of 1882 when she had been laughing at something he said and had been wearing her blue dress and had been, in that moment, genuinely laughing, genuinely glad of George's company, genuinely in the process of becoming someone who had moved on. All of this was true. She had moved on. George was a good man. She had said yes to him honestly and had meant it. She also understood, sitting at her kitchen table in the October morning, that she had been going to sleep for 4 months thinking about a person who was not George. She had been careful not to examine this too closely. The way you are careful about things that will cost you if you look at them directly. She was looking at it now. The cost of it was clear and she was going to pay it, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was George's kind brown eyes in 20 years, knowing the way decent people know things they have been told not to notice. She went to see George that afternoon. She told him that James had come back. She told him what James had said. She told him all of it because George deserved all of it, because there was no version of this that was better for George if she left parts out. He listened the whole way through without interrupting, which was one of the things that was good about George. He listened correctly. When she was finished, he said, "Is it different that he came back?" She said, "No." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Clara." She said, "Yes." He said, "Is it different?" He asked it again exactly, as if the first time had been a test and the second time was the question. She was quiet for a long time. She said, "I don't know." He said, "I think you need to be sure." She said, "George." He said, "I think you need to be sure. And I think if you were sure, you wouldn't have told me any of this." She wrote the letter to George that night at her kitchen table at midnight with the lamp turned low. It was 3 pages long. Every word of it was true. She had never written anything that true, had not known she was capable of sentences that honest. She told him that he deserved a woman who was certain, and that she was not certain, and that not being certain was the answer she had been refusing to hear for 4 months. And that she was sorry, and that she knew what kind of man he was, and that the knowing made this harder and more necessary simultaneously, and that she hoped he understood what she meant by that. She sealed the letter and addressed it and set it on the table. She sat with it for a while, looking at his name in her handwriting. Then she went to bed and slept better than she had in 4 months. She wrote to James the following morning. Short, because short was the honest length for it. She said, "Come back when you are ready to have the rest of this conversation, the part where you say the whole of what you mean and I say the whole of what I mean, and we say it to each other's faces and not at 6 in the morning in a doorway." She said, "I am not promising you anything." She said, "I am not unaware of the last 2 years or what they cost." She said, "Come back anyway." He came back on a Thursday afternoon, as she had asked, which she had not entirely been sure he would do until she heard his horse on the street and looked out her school window and saw him at the boarding house at the end of the main road. She finished the afternoon's lessons. She dismissed the children at 4 o'clock. She walked to the boarding house. He was sitting on the porch with his hat on his knee, and he stood when he saw her coming. They walked the North Road together for 2 hours. It was October and cold, and they walked in their coats and they talked in the way of people who have been careful with each other for a long time and have decided to stop being careful, which was a different kind of talking. The kind where the sentences do not have to be arranged before they are said, where the things that are hard to say are said because they are the next true thing and not because the moment has been prepared for them. She told him about the 2 years on her side, what the waiting had been, and then the decision to stop waiting, and what that decision had actually felt like, which was not relief but something harder than relief, the specific work of setting something down that you have been carrying for too long. He told her about Missouri and the estate and the social in November and riding back south that night telling himself it was the right thing. He said, "It was not the right thing." She said, "No." He said, "I know that." She said, "I know you know it." He said, "Where does that leave us?" She thought about it for a while. She said, "I don't know yet." He said, "That's honest." She said, "I'm going to be honest with you from now on even when it's inconvenient." He said, "I'd like that." She said, "Good." When they came back to the edge of town where the North Road met the main street, they stopped. She said, "I have school in the morning." He said, "I know." She said, "You could come to supper." He said, "I could." She said, 6 o'clock. He said, 6 o'clock. She started toward her boarding house. He started toward his at the other end of the street. She stopped once and looked back. He was already looking back. She went home. That evening she sat at her kitchen table where she had sat on Tuesday morning with the lamp and the lesson plans, and the knock had come. And the table was the same table, and the lamp was the same lamp, and the lesson plans were the same plans she had set aside and not yet finished, and everything was different in the specific way that everything is different when what you have been managing has finally been set down. She finished the lesson plans. She graded papers. She went to bed at a reasonable hour. She thought about 6 o'clock on a Friday, which was tomorrow, which was the thing directly in front of her, which was where she had decided to look from now on. George Harmon received Clara's letter on a Thursday morning, before the store opened, in the specific early quiet of a Thursday that he had already known was not going to be an ordinary Thursday. He had known it since Wednesday evening, when he had been unable to sleep, which was not characteristic, and had sat in his kitchen with a candle and thought about what Clara had told him at the counter on Tuesday. James Aldridge is back, and he told me what happened, and I don't know what to do with that. She had said she didn't know what to do with it. George had listened to all of it with the full attention of a man who knows how to listen, and had said the right thing, which was, "I think you need to be sure." He had said it because it was true, and because Clara deserved to hear it, and because he had understood, somewhere in the middle of her telling him, that the not knowing was already the answer. He read the letter at the counter, 3 pages in Clara's careful schoolteacher handwriting. Every word of it honest. He could tell it was honest because it was specific, and specific things are honest things. She said he deserved a woman who was certain. She said she had tried to be certain and had found she was not. She said she was sorry in a way that did not ask him to forgive her, just to understand, and he did understand, which was the particular quality of George Harmon that had made Clara say yes to him in the first place, and that would, in the end, make him fine. He locked the store for the morning. He sat in the back with a cup of coffee and thought about it the way he thought about everything, steadily and without drama. He had known, somewhere underneath the decent thing he had been doing, that there was a version of this story in which he was not the right answer. He had hoped he was wrong. He had not been entirely surprised. He wrote a letter to his sister in Denver, who had been telling him for 3 years to come visit, and he made plans to go in November, and he went to bed that Thursday evening considerably earlier than usual and slept better than he had in 4 months. Because decent men do. Because what Clara had told him was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him, and honest things, even when they cost you, are the ones that let you sleep. In the spring he met a woman who had no doubt about him at all. From the first conversation, which had taken place in his sister's kitchen over coffee and had lasted 3 hours, he was not surprised. He had always been the kind of man someone could be certain about. He had needed the right someone to be certain.